All right, so you want to dive into ancient India, huh? The source you sent in, well, it's not every day you see Vietnamese and Will Durant together. Excerpts from the story of civilization, but translated.
Definitely makes you think about how far these ideas travel.
No kidding. So ancient India, we're talking triumphs, challenges, legacies, the whole shebang. Durant's got a lot to say, and we're going to unpack it all.
Sounds like a plan.
Now, one thing that jumps out from what you've already researched, the sheer scale of it, this civilization, it was run before the pyramids, kept going strong through centuries, longer than anything in the West. What's your take on that kind of historical scope?
Honestly, it's humbling. Like, civilizations, they're not just these fixed things.
Yeah.
They evolve, they adapt, they leave their mark. And India, they've been doing it for a long, long time.
It really puts things in perspective. And speaking of leaving a mark, let's talk Durant for a sec. The guy wasn't just a historian, he was a storyteller. Seriously, he could make history as gripping as, like, the best novel.
Oh, yeah, you can tell he really gets you invested in the story.
Exactly. And one of his big things is understanding civilizations on their own terms. Don't judge the past by today's standards.
Mm.
Which brings us to Mohenjo-Daro, buried for ages in the Indus Valley. And man, this place turns a lot of assumptions upside down. See, Mohenjo-Daro, it wasn't some village. This was a planned city, grid system, drainage. They even had their own script, like Sumer, Babylon. Mohenjo-Daro was right up there in terms of sophistication. It's incredible how interconnected the ancient world was, even back then. What are your thoughts on that, especially given its location?
It really challenges our usual ideas about the centers of civilization, right? It wasn't just Mesopotamia, Egypt. The Indus Valley was a hub of activity, innovation, complexity. You look at their urban planning, it screams organized. They knew engineering. They understood social structure.
Absolutely. And get this, the deeper they dug, the more advanced the artifacts got. Can you imagine? A civilization that was maybe even more advanced earlier on. It's a total head-scratcher.
Right.
Makes you wonder what else is out there just waiting to be found.
It's that feeling of we're only scratching the surface. Like, history's a puzzle, and we keep finding new pieces.
Totally. And speaking of uncovering complexity, let's talk about the caste system. It's one of those things about ancient India that, well, it gets a lot of attention, and rightly so. But we got to approach it carefully, historically. Our source mentions stuff like endogamy, marrying within a specific group, and even colorism. Imagine a society where your social standing was that intertwined with those factors.
Yeah. It's key to remember, the caste system, it wasn't static. What we're seeing in ancient India, it's like early stages,
Yeah.
not the rigid structure it became later on.
That's such an important point. We love to make history black and white, but it's never that simple. So we've got this advanced civilization, but they're also grappling with social divisions. Seems like a good point to transition to beliefs and ideas, wouldn't you say? How did they make sense of the world, and how did they pass on what they knew?
Absolutely. A civilization's beliefs, their intellectual pursuits, that's how you get to know its soul. Let's get into it.
One thing that struck me about ancient India, going through all this, is their oral tradition. We think libraries, right? Scrolls, books. But for them, knowledge was like this living thing passed down through generations by word of mouth.
It's wild to think about, isn't it?
Entire epics memorized, complex philosophy, even math. It makes you appreciate the power of memory they must have had.
It speaks volumes about how they valued knowledge. Not just memorizing it, but how it was woven into their culture, their way of life. Storytelling, the spoken word, it kept their history alive, their wisdom. Makes you think about what we might be missing with our, instant information overload today.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And speaking of wisdom, we got to talk about one figure from ancient India that really embodies that Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha.
Right.
His story is one for the ages, a prince living it up in luxury, and he just walks away from it all to figure out suffering, enlightenment, the big questions.
It's a powerful story.
And from that personal journey, bam, a whole movement explodes, spreading far beyond India.
Well, his teachings, they resonated, right?
Yeah.
Suffering, desire, searching for meaning, it's universal stuff. And what's fascinating to me is how Buddhism itself changes over time.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Early days, it's very much about individual enlightenment, right?
Right.
Then you get Mahayana Buddhism, emphasizing compassion, the interconnectedness of everything. Shows you how dynamic religious thought can be.
Totally. Like Buddhism across Asia, it takes on different flavors, but the core's still there. And speaking of adaptation, the relationship between Buddhism and Hinduism in India, that's wild. So you've got this hugely popular new religion, even emperors like Ashoka are on board, promoting peace, nonviolence. But instead of wiping out Hinduism, it kind of gets absorbed back into it. What do you make of that?
Speaks to a tolerance in ancient Indian thought that you don't always see historically. Think about all the religious conflict in history, often violent. But here, there's this fluidity. Different belief systems coexisting, learning from each other. Religions weren't always separated by such hard lines. Buddhism being absorbed back into Hinduism. That's uniquely Indian, I'd say. This amazing example of how cultures adapt, evolve through exchange.
You know, it's easy to think of ancient civilizations as kind of fixed, unchanging, but change, adaptation, it seems like that's key to why ancient India lasted so long. And we see it even more when we look at their art, their literature. So let's switch gears a bit, shall we? We've talked about the grandeur of Mohenjo-Daro, but you also mentioned the Ajanta caves in your research.
Oh, yeah.
Not exactly a bustling city, but they give us a whole other look at ancient Indian art.
For sure.
Imagine this. You're in a cave, right? And all around you, these incredible murals full of detail telling stories about the Buddha's life, scenes of love, loss, you name it. And these weren't just decoration, they were visual stories, expressions of faith, incredible skill. What do you think these caves tell us about how art functioned in their society?
They're like a testament to how powerful art can be, for storytelling, for expressing spirituality. Remember how we were talking about oral tradition?
Yeah.
It's like these murals did the same thing, just visually. Complex stories, beliefs, all laid out in these images. And anyone could understand them, no matter what language they spoke.
Yeah.
Plus, the craftsmanship, the colors, the forms.
Yeah.
It points to such a rich artistic tradition.
Mind-blowing. And you know what's cool? It's not just ancient history. You mentioned modern Indian artists, how they're blending these old styles with new techniques.
It's awesome, right?
It's like this thread connecting the past and present.
Totally. Traditions, they don't just disappear. They grow, they inspire. Each generation finds its own way to carry them on. Sadly, though, so much of India's art is lost. Invasions, especially the Mughals. They destroyed so many temples, works of art, it's hard to even grasp the scale of what's gone. Makes you cherish what we have found even more.
It really does. And speaking of treasures, their literature. Epics like the Mahabharata, filled with battles, intrigue, characters you won't forget, and then bam. Philosophical reflections that are still relevant today. It's not just action, it's about dharma, duty, morality, universal stuff. Is there anything today, you think, that has that kind of impact, that reaches so deep into a society?
It's tough to say. Just one thing. But maybe. Like, think about books, movies, even TV shows that capture everyone's attention, get us talking about big ideas. Social issues, philosophy, that's kind of similar.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
The Mahabharata, it wasn't just entertainment, right? It reflected their whole worldview, how they saw existence. Those stories weren't just on the page. They were woven into their lives.
Wow, it's been quite a ride today, hasn't it? We've wandered the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, scratched our heads over their incredibly advanced early civilization, delved into the complexities of the caste system, explored the power of their oral tradition, and stood in awe of their art and literature. Just like Will Durant, we've been captivated by the story of ancient India, a civilization that flourished for thousands of years, leaving its mark on art, philosophy, spirituality, the world, really. But as we wrap up our deep dive into ancient India, I'm left with this thought. They gave us the concept of zero, a foundational idea in math, and Ayurveda, a system of healing still practiced today. What other treasures from ancient India might we be overlooking? How do those legacies continue to shape us today? I know I'll be thinking about it, and I hope you will too. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into the heart of ancient India.